We are going into a breaking news story. Again, this was sent to me last night after last night's stream. And, when October 7th happened, one of the things that I said when I covered this is that I thought it was very strange that all of a sudden Israeli forces would not be on guard and Hamas was able to break out of the fence, right? So that was one of the things I said. And I said, I just found that to be very odd. All of a sudden, one night, you're just not on guard and they just go off and break free. Well, now, doesn't seem to be that odd after all. Some people told me that it was wrong for me to make that guess or that assumption. They said I was wrong. How dare you assume that how dare you think that way? Right. Because people want to put us in a box and not everything is black and white. And I want people to think outside of the box because now the Boston Post sent this last night. Israel knew Hamas's attack plan more than a year ago. If that sounds familiar, I'll tell you why. Let's get into this. Israeli officials obtained Hamas's battle plan for the October 17th attack more than a year before it happened. Documents, emails, and interviews show. But Israeli military and intelligence officials dismissed the plan as aspirational, considering it too difficult for Hamas to carry out. It reminds me of September 11. We'll get into that in just a second. I'm going to read a little bit more here, and then we're going to go to the video. The approximately 40-page document, which Israeli authorities codenamed Jericho Wall, outlined point by point exactly the kind of devastating invasion that led to the deaths of about 1,200 people. The translated document, which was reviewed by the New York Times, did not set a date for the attack, but described a methodical assault designed to overwhelm the fortifications around the Gaza Strip, take over Israeli cities, and storm key military bases, including a division headquarters. Get this part. Hamas followed the blueprint with shocking precision. The document called for a barrage of rockets at the outset of the attack, drones to knock out the security cameras, and automated machine guns along the border, and gunmen to pour into Israel en masse in paragliders, on motorcycles, and on foot, all of which happened on October 7th. So, we're going to go to CNN first. We have CNN and we have MSNBC, and I want you to see how shocked they seem to be to hear this news. Because this isn't the first time that we've heard something like this. This isn't the first time. I remember September 11th, come to find out, oh, wow, they knew that though the terrorists for September 11th, they already knew they were already here in the country. Shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. Anderson Cooper, a bit shocked, but I am not. Let's get into it.
Good evening. A lot to get to tonight. We begin with breaking news. New and highly detailed reporting just out from the New York Times in a piece headlined, Israel knew Hamas's attack plan more than a year ago. Reporters from the Times lay out just how much they say was known in advance about what Hamas was planning and ultimately carried out on October 7th. It came just hours after Hamas freed 8 more hostages today and just 4 hours until the shaky 7-day truce with Israel expires. Joining us now from the New York Times, Ronan Bergman, who shares a byline on this stunning new report. Ronan, thanks for being with us. Talk about what your team learned about this blueprint and the length of time that Israel had to review these plans and why it wasn't listened to.
Ronan might want to go into hiding for a couple of weeks.
So somewhere around along 2022, Israeli intelligence was able to get the plan for the Hamas attack. It was codenamed by Israeli intelligence the Wall of Jericho, the Jericho Wall. And it details in many different details how the attack is going to take place, exactly as it took place more than a year after. This could be an intelligence victory for Israel, but Israeli analysts, some of the seniors of Israeli intelligence, saw the plan as more of, they call it a compass for the building of the forces, where Hamas wants to be, but not where Hamas is. So while having that plan, they saw this as something that Hamas is far from being capable of doing.
Let's pause there for a second. According to Israeli officials and Netanyahu, right? Because Netanyahu knew as well. That's why he's on the thumbnail. According to them, they said that Hamas is such a terror, right? So if that is the case, and they had this blueprint for what Hamas was planning to do, you would have thought that they would have taken every precaution possible to protect the Israeli people, right? Don't they care so much about the Israeli people? Wouldn't they have taken every precaution possible to make sure that the people were protected, unless they secretly wanted it to happen, to have an excuse to go to war with Gaza? Similar to 9/11, right? CIA, they knew that they were already here in the country, could have collaborated with the FBI. We'll get into that when I talk about what happened with the Lumen Tower. Could have collaborated with the FBI and actually could have prevented that from happening, since they care so much about the American people, right? Unless they wanted to use that as an excuse to go to war. Let's put the two and two together, ladies and gentlemen.
They believe that Hamas doesn't have the ability to conduct such a massive operation. We are talking about, according to that plan, to break the fence between Gaza and Israel in 60 different places. Israel believed they could do that maybe in 2 places.
But they also acknowledged that they were able to build all these tunnels, right? Able to build all these complex tunnels underground, but they don't think they can break through a fence.
It called for the bombing and destruction of the cameras instantly. The same simultaneously, the beginning of the attack of the cameras, the automatic guns, the communication centers, and then the ramping of the division headquarters, the Gaza division headquarters that is in charge of protecting the front. In July of this year, so a year after, an analyst that was reviewing intercepts about Hamas military exercises wrote a letter, an email, an exchange of email, encrypted email. She comes from 8200, this is the Israeli NSA, the equivalent to the American NSA. And she described that drill, and she said that she believes that Hamas is narrowing the gap between the Wall of Jericho plan and its real capabilities. And there was a pushback from most senior intelligence officers that told her, this is an imaginary plan. They cannot do that. And so here is the...
So you believe that they would actually take that amount of time to draw up a blueprint that complex just as part of their imagination? Really? A group that, according to Netanyahu, is this terrifying, they would just imagine?
Tragedy for Israeli intelligence, for Israeli public, instead of positioning, it's not just an intelligence debate. If the Israeli Defense Forces would adopt this plan as something that Hamas can do, even without any connection to the intention of Hamas, the decision to execute, this is something that the analyst couldn't say. She did not push back on the Israeli wisdom at that time meaning 3-4 months ago, that Hamas doesn't want to go to all-in-one. But if Israeli defense establishment had the knowledge that Hamas is capable of launching such an attack, that would put a total different size of forces on the border. The outcome could be very different.
Long story short, Netanyahu fucked up. Let's just be clear about that. They made a big mistake. And they probably never thought that this information would actually be leaked to the press that they knew over a year ago. Let's continue.
To your reporting, this analyst, this woman analyst, saw an exercise that Hamas undertook, a trial run, and raised red flags again, saying this looks very much like the Wall of Jericho plan that we had discussed before, and again would seem to have been dismissed.
Not just that, she says, here's an interesting bit of information. The same quote from the Quran, Surah Al-Ma'idah, that begins with which this detailed plan for action, this detailed plan for attack starts with. It's called for, this is something about Moses, but it's about the surprise entry through a gate. I think it's not a coincidence that Hamas picked this up. The people participating, the Hamas gunmen participating in that drill were using the same quote. The same quote is now part of the emblem of Hamas, used in all Hamas publications, statement and videos since the attack.
As you know, the Israeli government posted online on X last month, quote, contrary to the false claims, under no circumstances and at no stage was Prime Minister Netanyahu warned of Hamas's war intentions. They went on to say at no point was a warning given to Prime Minister Netanyahu on Hamas's intention to start a war. On the contrary, all the defense officials, including the heads of the Intelligence Directorate and the Shin Bet, assessed that Hamas was deterred. Do you know if the Prime Minister was, in fact, informed? Because it sounds like from your reporting that this document was widely disseminated in intelligence and military circles.
Okay, come on, guys. Let's use our own brains here, okay? Do you honestly believe that he had no idea? You honestly believe that? Of course, they're going to try to protect him, just as if like our military and the Pentagon would find a way to protect our president. Of course, they're going to find a way to protect the Prime Minister of Israel. But Anderson Cooper loves to have this confused look on his face as if everything is just a surprise to him. Now, he's been commentator for how many years? He's been on the ground in some locations and sometimes pretending to be on the ground. But he has been doing this for a long time. I remember seeing Anderson Cooper on the news when I was in undergrad, okay? So he always seems surprised that things aren't exactly what they seem.
Yeah. So we don't know if Prime Minister Netanyahu was presented with this document. We do know, and this comes from previous reporting, that he was warned again and again and again and again, and in details, at least in 4 different letters throughout the last year, that the members of the so-called axis of resistance, Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, see Israeli weakness, and they might decide to use what they believe a window of opportunity to attack.
Yeah.
So did you guys hear what he just said? He said Netanyahu was warned again and again and again. This is not good for Netanyahu. And I'm curious to see what is going to be Joe Biden's response to this latest piece of information. What is going to be their response? What about members of Congress? How are they going to respond to this? What do you say? What do you say if you've been giving them billions of dollars? What do you say? Oof, a little bit more here and we'll go to MSNBC clip.
This document was sent to many, and I think this is a good point for further reporting about who saw and who decided to continue with this so-called conception, the ability to believe that Hamas is contained.
Ronan Bergman, it's incredible reporting. Thank you. More now on the forces at play tonight. Joining us.
Okay. Now I want to move on to MSNBC because they don't seem to look as confused as Anderson Cooper does. So this is actually Emoji Guy. So let's go ahead and give a shout out to Case Study QB for this clip as well. So we have Mr. Emoji, and I always forget her name, but they're talking about this discovery as well. And I'm not trying to be mean, but he really does look like emoji. He looks like the emoji that is smiling and has the glasses. That's what he looks like, emoji.
Thanks to you at home for joining me this hour. We begin tonight with some breaking news. The New York Times has just published a major new report about Israeli intelligence failures in the lead up to Hamas's October 7th attack. According to this new reporting, not yet verified by NBC News, Israeli intelligence officials obtained Hamas's detailed battle plan for the October 7th attack more than a year before the attack took place. Quoting from the New York Times, Israeli officials obtained Hamas's battle plan for the October 7th terrorist attack more than a year before it happened, documents, emails, and interviews show. But Israeli military and intelligence officials dismissed the plan as aspirational, considering it too difficult for Hamas to carry out. The approximately 40-page document, which the Israeli authorities codenamed Jericho Wall, outlined point by point exactly the kind of devastating invasion that led to the deaths of about 1,200 people. Hamas followed the blueprint with shocking precision. The document called for a barrage of rockets at the outside of the attack. It called for drones to knock out the security cameras and automated machine guns along the border. And it called for gunmen to pour into Israel en masse in paragliders, on motorcycles, and on foot, all of which happened on October 7th. Yep. Officials privately concede that had the military taken these warnings seriously, Israel could have blunted the attacks or possibly even prevented them.
Just like September 11. Yes, Mr. EB. That's the emoji with the glasses. Yeah.
What could have been an intelligence coup turned into one of the worst miscalculations in Israel's 75-year history. Joining us now is former CIA director under President Obama, John Brennan. He is now an MSNBC senior national security and intelligence analyst. Director Brennan, thank you for being here. And let me just first get your reaction to this bombshell reporting from the New York Times.
Well, Alex, I was utterly shocked when I read through that New York Times report. The fact that the Israelis were able to collect more than a year in advance the actual battle plan that Hamas used, but then failed to be able to realize that this was in fact what they were going to do. It shows that they made faulty assumptions, and that's one of the real problems with any type of policy or intelligence failure when you make those assumptions. And here it was underestimating the capabilities of their adversary. And that usually happens when they're looking at sort of a paramilitary adversary. It's sort of unconventional, irregular forces. But this document, this Jericho Wall document that they got, it should have been the prism through which they looked at every Hamas action over the past year to see whether or not the Hamas fighters were actually working on it and making progress against it. They deemed that it was too aspirational for Hamas to carry out. But this, they had more than a year to be able to judge and evaluate whether or not Hamas was moving down that progression. And obviously, this is something that is going to require very extensive review in terms of what the failure was. But it also raises serious questions about how intelligence might be not used appropriately, or not, or is not the system is not working the way it should. If this document didn't make it through to be actually an opportunity for Israel to stop and prevent those horrific attacks.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no reason for you to stop and try to prevent it if this is what you want to happen in order to have an excuse to go to war. I mean, let's be real. And I'm pretty sure John Brennan knows that. He's not going to say that on MSNBC. But I wasn't shocked by the fact that they knew over a year ago. I was shocked that the New York Times actually reported it, right? Because the New York Times is a favorable publication towards the Democratic Party. President of the United States is Democrat right now. They tend to back the Democrats. They tend to back Joe Biden, right? So I was surprised, very surprised, that the New York Times actually reported it. This is something I expect to see from someone's Substack. Not kidding. This is something I expect to be reported by Seymour Hersh, or I don't know, like Dan Cohen, right? Or the Gray Zone. Like, I don't expect this to come from the New York Times. And I think that's what's shocking to me. It's not shocking to me that they knew for over a year. It's shocking that a mainstream publication like the New York Times, which is very much corporate and bought, that they were the ones who actually reported it.
You say this document should have been the prism through which all Hamas exercises, for example, were seen. There's a detail in the piece that says in July, just 3 months before the attacks, a veteran analyst with Unit 8200, which is Israel's signals intelligence agency, warned that Hamas had conducted an intense day-long training exercise that appeared similar to what was outlined in the blueprint. And the same analyst goes on to say, it is a plan designed to start a war, she added.
So they actually had, this is the part that's interesting as well, you guys. They actually had a training exercise. Okay. So they had like an entire day of a training exercise practicing what they were going to do. And you mean to tell me nobody saw this or questioned this?
It's not just a raid on a village. First of all, the idea that they effectively saw a dry run for this, how unusual is that? And in terms of an analyst ringing an alarm bell so clearly, is that unusual?
Well, that analyst did exactly what she was supposed to do, which was to look at what Hamas was doing and to see whether or not there's any correlation with previous intelligence that the Israelis collected. And she seemed to be pushing it, but somebody up the chain of command, or somebody's up the chain of command, still determined that Hamas would be unable to carry out such a broad, extensive plan. But this is where you really need to have those analysts continue to push it up the chain of command. And this is what they're going to have to look at in any type of commission review. How did the system break down so profoundly that they weren't able to exploit the opportunity that was given to them by actually collecting this document more than a year ago?
Did the system break down, or was it just built that way? Did it really break down? I mean, this is something to think about here for a second, because for me, I'm listening to this and I'm just like, you got to be kidding me, right? It broke down. All of a sudden, these IDF soldiers who have been harassing Palestinian people, dragging kids out of their freaking homes, kidnapping these children away from their parents, holding guns to people's head, removing people from their homes, throwing them in an open air prison. All of a sudden, these soldiers just happened to be not around on the day that this happened. Just happened to be, just weren't there, weren't guarding all of a sudden. But this is not a good look for Netanyahu. This is not a good look for the United States government. And I want to highlight Alexis' comment here. It's how the U.S. is going to get Netanyahu out, so they are letting it be reported. That's a really good point there, Alexis. But I just got to say, like, this is crazy. This is wild. I just want to remind everyone, we'll get to September 11th, because I want to remind you, we've been here before.
To that end, it sounds like there was one colonel in charge of the Gaza unit in particular who sort of stood in the way of her warnings, potentially ascending up the food chain, if you will. A colonel in the Gaza division brushed off the analyst's concerns, according to encrypted emails that were viewed by the Times. I utterly refute that this scenario is imaginary, the analyst wrote in email exchanges. The colonel in the Gaza division applauded the analysis, but said the exercise was part of a totally imaginative scenario, not an indication of Hamas's ability to pull it off. In short, let's wait patiently.
Let's take a chance and let's just wait and see what happens. Really?
The colonel wrote. Director Brennan, in short, let's wait patiently. That is the stuff that lives on in infamy after October 7th. I know we're talking about a different intelligence service over here in Israel, but as far as that chain of command, as far as the ways an analyst would have around a colonel like this who seems dead set on not taking this anywhere, I mean, does that opportunity exist? How many people do you imagine saw this report?
There should have been a lot, and there should be no single point of failure. No single person should be able to stop something like this from being further reviewed and looked at. If this document, seems to be no question, according to the reporting, that this was a legitimate Hamas document in the eyes of Israeli intelligence. They just didn't believe they were able to carry this out. But something like this should have been shared broadly. I wonder, something like this should have been shared broadly across Israeli defense intelligence, Shin Bet, even Mossad, and others. And even to the extent that, the United States has such a close intelligence relationship with the Israelis, this is something that I think they really would want to have fresh eyes look at, and to also see whether or not U.S. intelligence or other intelligence might have picked up some indications that, in fact, Hamas was able to start to operationalize this plan. But if it was kept within a small group of people, or if one individual was able to stop this from actually being reviewed and considered to be a real legitimate plan that Hamas would be able to carry out, there is a strong need for there to be an immediate review of what's going on inside of Israeli intelligence and how this information gets to policymakers to make sure that it can be acted upon, operationalized, and to mitigate any potential future threats.
Well, BB, it does not look good for you. But think about what John Brennan just said there. That's really interesting. He's saying that they even should have had U.S. intelligence officials look at this documentation as well, which did not happen. And for the U.S. government to come out wholeheartedly in support of Israel and say we have to help them, we have to, stop Hamas, etc., and not knowing everything behind it. And now this information comes out. It really does make, yes, once again, it makes the U.S. government look really foolish. But I believe these things are planned. I like to think outside the box. And I want to tell you what it does remind me of. It reminds me of September 11th. There was a show. It was called The Looming Tower. If this is still on Hulu, I highly recommend that you watch this show. And after you watch each episode, make sure you fact check it. I did this, so make sure you fact check it. But The Looming Tower is about the events that took place before September 11 and the events that took place after. So you get the full picture, not just we're starting with what happened on that day and moving forward. And one of the things I learned from watching this show, and I did look this up myself, is that they already knew that the CIA already knew that the guys who flew the planes were already in the United States. They did not share that information with the FBI. So sometimes these agencies actually do not work together. They don't talk to each other, It's kind of like when I still worked in higher ed, like a lot of these universities they're decentralized, which means that departments don't necessarily talk to each other. So you may have information that I need, but because we're not in the same department, I'm not going to get that information. Okay. Silly, but it happens. So they were not working together, so to speak. This gentleman here on the left, the guy in real life died. He died in the Twin Towers. He actually got out of his tower and then he went back up to help other people get out. He died. This guy tried to give the warning. He said, listen, I think they're coming here. I think this is what is going to happen. So he was actually on the right path. He was fired from the FBI. He was frustrated that they weren't listening to him. So there are some things that he did to get the information that he needed that they said was out of the scope. So they fired him. And then he ended up taking a job at the World Trade Center at the two towers, one of the towers. And then that's where he died. Look it up. This is very important. Again, if it's on Hulu, if it's still there, I highly recommend you watch it. I binged through this. It's really informative. John P. O'Neill. Thank you so much, Eric. That was his name. John P. O'Neill, or you can just Google him. And there's a whole bio about this guy. I'm not kidding. It's a lot of information. But he tried to warn them, this is what is coming. He was not listened to. But come to find out that the CIA, they already knew that they were here. So I wanted to bring this up because I just wanted to remind you, based on what we're hearing right now with Israel and with Gaza, here we are again, where now they are admitting, thanks to that article from the New York Times, they are admitting that they knew over a year ago. They had the blueprint for the attack that happened on October 7th over a year ago and didn't seem to want to act on it. Whether it's a mistake, a mishap or not, I believe that was used as an excuse for them to go to war with Gaza. That's my take on that.